we are spending money on all sorts of things that we don't really need. That money, if donated to independently evaluated, highly effective charities, could be doing a lot of good. I think Australia's foreign aid program is deplorably small in proportion to our wealth. So we're really lagging behind. I'm using my good fortune in being a citizen of an affluent country to give some assistance to others in great need.
Good to see you again, man. How are you?
Yes, pretty good, thank you.
Yeah, it's your Australian accent comes to us. It sounds like from far away.
No, it's not far away. I'm just in Melbourne.
You're back in Melbourne.
Yeah.
We're speaking right now at a very interesting time in Australia. There's been a horrific terrorist attack in Bondi Beach. The president of Israel was invited out here, and let's just say everybody in the street is being cool. They're listening to each other. They're trying to find a way forward together, trying to understand the nuance of what's going on in imaginary land.
Yes.
It's terrible. From a ethics point of view, from a philosophy point of view, what are we seeing playing out on the streets in Australia right now?
Well, we're seeing obviously opposition to what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's entirely understandable. We're also seeing, I think, a resurgence in anti-Semitism, which no doubt is riding off the opposition to what Israel is doing in Gaza. And of course, we've had, as you say, the atrocious terrorist attack. But I think we are seeing also a response from the vast majority of Australians of revulsion at that and at anti-Semitism. That seems to be, there are certainly more anti-Semitic incidents occurring. And so, these are conflicting currents. But, my personal opinion is that you can be perfectly critical of what Israel is doing in Gaza without that indicating anti-Semitism at all.
There's a lot of emotion. Obviously, it's a very emotional situation, and trying to have empathy at the same time as a part of our body is being outraged at what is quite clearly terrible choices being made. It's really difficult. We as humans, do we find it hard? Like sometimes we don't know when we're full, and so we eat too many calories and we gain weight. Is being able to hold emotion, strong emotion and revulsion and empathy something that we're just not capable of doing sometimes?
Well, it's difficult, and you're saying we, that is a very wide range of people. Some of them I think can do it quite well, and others not at all. And it's just going to depend what the numbers are. How many people can reconcile that revulsion and the strong emotions and go forward in a way that I hope is generally civil and reasonable and does not involve racism of any kind.
Ethics is something I think that aims to approach a problem with a neutral stance. But how can we navigate a moral question in a public conversation when points of view, as you mentioned, of what is reality can be based on entirely conflicting ideas that may not even operate in the same universe?
Well, they operate in the same universe. We only have this one universe to operate in. But yes, there are different ideas of reality, and there are also different ideas of what justifies what, really. I think that's, in a way, the debate.
What happens when we try to have conversations? We're talking about a very highly charged conversation, but it can happen with anything. It can happen with veganism, happen with climate. It can happen with, juvenile detention. When we're motivated, when we use motivated reasoning, and that we want our worldview is centered around this outcome of adult crime for adult time, for example, and we say those people are shown, here are all the stats, all the research that shows what happens when you put a child in prison at 10. And that evidence is just pushed to one side because, no, I said adult crime for adult time. What's going on in our heads when that sort of thing happens?
Well, as you described it as motivated reasoning, and it's true that a lot of people have positions and they want to reason in ways that enable them to retain those positions and to defend them. That's, we just know that happens as a psychological fact. It's obviously would be much more desirable if people were more open to looking at the arguments that people who have a different view put forward and considering those arguments on their merits. And then maybe you would come closer to seeing what's going on.
For example, the imaginary person I was just discussing, the adult crime for adult time person, or the climate person. I used to work with a guy. He's one of the smartest guys ever. As often people who work in television are, they're right into physics, right into maths. They love the angles and stuff, and yet for some reason couldn't accept the science around climate. And it became apparent that, oh, you're not defending yourself against that. You've created the identity that you now associate with that. I don't believe in that stuff, and any evidence that comes toward you, you see as an attack upon yourself. What are some signs that we might be falling into that trap, that we're protecting our identity rather than actually listening or absorbing new information?
Not looking at the arguments that go against your viewpoint, your present identity, dismissing them just because of where they come from without looking at them on their merits. I think it's the basic issue that we talk about with science, about trying to look at the evidence as objectively as you can, and acknowledging that we're fallible creatures, that's hard for us to do. But people do sometimes shift their views on these questions, and that's really what's needed.
It's difficult sometimes to have a conversation, though. Like I worked with this guy for a long time, and it got to the point where not a lot of people would be talking to him at lunch. And that's really hard, though, because it creates this almost self-fulfilling loop.
So did you try to talk to him and see what arguments he had to think that his opinion was better than that of the vast majority of scientists who study climate?
Yes, and it became ad hominem and whataboutism almost immediately.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, when you get to that stage where you're not really looking at the evidence, but you're making ad hominem arguments against your opponent and pointing to other situations that are bad, then it gets difficult. And I think maybe, at some point you need to say, look, you're not really looking at the arguments, you're not looking at the evidence. If you want me to have a conversation with you about this really important issue, you have to do that. Otherwise, we can't talk about this topic. Now, whether you can still be friends in some sense when disagreeing about that would depend on what the nature of the relationship is.
You've said that being willing to revise your views is a moral responsibility. If you're open to it, would you be open to sharing something that you have changed your mind about?
Oh, obviously, over my lifetime, I've changed my mind about very important things. When I was a graduate student at Oxford, when I went to Oxford in 1969, I was 23. I never thought that anything to do with animals posed a serious moral problem. I thought that the real moral issues were about, things that were going on then, the war in Vietnam, which certainly is a serious moral issue, and of course the civil rights movement, racial equality. Those were the questions, and equality also, political and economic equality, social equality. Those were the questions that mostly concerned me. And then I just had a chance encounter with somebody who was a vegetarian. This was in 1970. I don't think I'd ever met, certainly not a Western vegetarian. This person was a Canadian. I'd maybe met some Indian vegetarians, but that was about it. Who started telling me about how the animals that I'd been eating all my life were actually living, that they were not outside in the fields having a pleasant life until the last day when they get trucked to slaughter, but they were crammed into huge dark sheds, very crowded, completely unsuited to their nature, and essentially leading miserable lives all the time. And that got me thinking, well, what would justify doing this to animals? And I thought about that for a while. I suppose, if we actually would die if we stopped eating animals, that might justify it, although even then, of course, we could at least rear them a lot better than we did, I thought. And in the end, I thought, no, there isn't anything that justifies this. It's something that I saw this term on a leaflet. I didn't invent it, but a man called Richard Ryder, who I then got to know, had a leaflet with the heading Speciesism. It was about experiments on chimpanzees. Showed a photo of a very sad-looking chimpanzee who'd been deliberately infected with syphilis. And I thought, yes, this is something similar to racism at the level of species rather than the level of race, or sexism at the level of sex. And it's a prejudice, and I've got this prejudice. And I need to think again. That's something wrong with this. We can't disregard the sufferings of animals when we don't need to inflict that suffering on them.
Knowing that we're inflicting suffering on an animal is one thing, but also knowing that we're inflicting suffering on another human is another. And I'm sure, I mean, even the most vehemently cranky person wouldn't want to deliberately hurt another so they could make a phone call. And yet, this phone that's in my hand, this smartphone here, is dripping in blood. There's minerals in that have come from countries that I know aren't really great with the way they treat their workers and things like this. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good. How do you reconcile with where just you living in a modern industrialized economy right now you're in Australia? How do you reckon with the impact that just us having this conversation even is having to other humans?
Well, I hope this conversation is having a positive impact on other humans. Otherwise, I actually would not have accepted the invitation to have it. I mean, that's
morally approved.
That's
yes.
the point. And that, maybe will depend on how we go for the rest of the. Yes, there are concerns about some of the goods we use, the minerals in your phone, for example, and we can try to do something about that. It's very difficult to do something about that. And I actually think that, in a way, there are, you ought to be looking at the scale of the impact you can have and how tractable the problem is. What is the chances that you can make a difference? And that's a very difficult one. And the scale is not enormous, right? There may be hundreds or thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people, who are in these conflict mineral areas, having very difficult lives. But while we're talking, there are something like 700 million people living in extreme poverty. And when you pick up your phone, actually, I thought you were going to say, well, how do I justify trading up my phone when I could be donating the money to effective organizations that would help some of these 700 million people in extreme poverty? And you can certainly do that. And I think that's something that, again, we don't think about enough. We don't think about the fact that we are spending money on all sorts of things that we don't really need. And that money, if donated to independently evaluated, highly effective charities, could be doing a lot of good.
You write about this a lot in the book, The Life You Can Save. It's a profound argument towards effective charity, which is something like many things that we know are good for us, and so we didn't forget them. We codified them into culture, like humming, singing, dancing in concert with each other, making sure we're around people at least once a week to eat food together. We put these into culture or religion to make sure we would remember to do them, and they would be useful for our community and help us prosper. Similarly, altruism and charity is a part of many cultures. Judaism, Sikhism, it's in Christianity, the one that I was brought up in. I'm not there anymore, but tithing was a part of that. Islam. These things got put in there for a reason. What is it that happens inside us? Like, yes, I can save a child's life, and that should be enough for me. But what happens inside us when we are charitable, when we give to somebody?
Well, I think something positive happens to most people. You feel that you've done something good. Sometimes it's described as the warm glow effect, and that's great. But I do think we need to be careful and not just, go for whatever causes the warm glow, because I know there have been people who give to a large number of charities and they give a small sum. Let's say they give $25 to 20 different charities, and each one gives them a warm glow because they think about what their $25 is doing. But maybe if they gave that, $500 total to one charity that was particularly effective and had been independently assessed as being particularly effective, that would actually do more good, and they wouldn't get so much mail from the 25 charities or whatever I said it was 20 that they're donating to, and the charity would have a significant sum because of course obviously there's a cost in acknowledging receipts uh, and trying to continue to cultivate donors. So I think we need to think about that, and we should be selective in the organizations, and we shouldn't just think about, well, I saw this picture of a child that this organization is helping and that child appealed to me. Yes, great. It's good to help children in impoverished circumstances, but you need to know a bit more about what the charity is doing. And that's why you mentioned the book, The Life You Can Save, but the organization that grew out of that um, is there to evaluate these charities and to help you find the ones that will get the most good out of your donation, however much you can afford to give.
You argue that helping people in extreme poverty isn't it's not an optional charity, that it's a moral obligation. Uh, if people are listening, they're breathless just trying to keep the lights on and the fridge full. What would you say to them?
Well, if they're really struggling to feed themselves and their family, I'm not saying anything to them. Go ahead and do that. I'm saying things to people who think nothing about going to a cafe for a cup of coffee and spending whatever it might be, $5, $7, $10.
$9 down the road from me.
How much?
9.
9, right? Okay. Yeah, when you can make your coffee at home. You can buy coffee at the supermarket, and you can make the coffee, and you can get perfectly good coffee. I think there's a lot of, probably more of your listeners, I would guess, who are paying $5, $7, or $9 for a cup of coffee at a cafe than are struggling to get enough food to feed their family. So it's those ones who have a little bit to spare that I'm addressing.
When we're talking about effective charities, and the foundation that you founded does a lot there, but it's not just that's a kind of like an on the ground delivery of whatever needs to happen. What's, like, we talked about our personal moral obligation. Can we dig into that a little bit more? We have a moral obligation to raise our kids and not harm them, and to let, as you mentioned, that children be children. Why is it a moral obligation that we should help a child in extreme poverty who's possibly not even anywhere in our country?
Well, I don't think it's morally relevant whether the child is in our country or not. I think what matters is, can we be confident that our donation is going to help that child, and how big a difference is our donation going to make? Now, if we're talking about raising children in Australia, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars a year to do that, right? And if most Australians, whatever they're earning, whether it's 40, 60, 80, 100, $120,000 a year, that's the kind of scale that you're talking about. And so to make a difference to the well-being of a child when you're a family that is earning any of those amounts I just mentioned, you need a substantial amount of money. Whereas if you have somebody who's in extreme poverty, the World Bank's line for extreme poverty is roughly $3, maybe in Australian dollars, maybe let's say $4 a day. And if somebody is on $4 a day, whatever, that's under $1,500 a year, you can make a huge difference to their lives for a very modest amount of money. Certainly less than many of us would spend going on a holiday. And so I think that's more relevant than whether the child is within the borders of our country or not, as long as you can have confidence that there's an organization that will actually help that child and help it effectively. And that's what The Life You Can Save is providing. It's providing that confidence, and you can look at the evidence. We're very transparent with the calculations that we do. It's all on the website. So I think that's what's important, and that's why we shouldn't just be thinking about our fellow Australians or fellow Americans or wherever we are. We should be thinking about how can we do the most good.
There's one thing we often see around election time. We've seen it in America, but foreign aid often comes under attack during election time, and that's, I guess, a nation's moral obligation to help others who aren't doing as well as they are. In Australia, we have free healthcare. We have no guns on the streets. It's paradise here. It's incredible. But yet foreign aid seems to come under attack at election time. What's a way that we can think about foreign aid that I guess might help people reframe the value of such a thing?
Yeah, we need to have confidence that our foreign aid is being spent well. I think that's part of the issue. And, when Trump came into power, he wanted to review the foreign aid programs that the US had, but he did this in a very brutal way. He just froze all the money for 90 days while they started assessing. Now, firstly, you couldn't assess all those programs properly in 90 days. And secondly, that meant that people, for example, who were being supported with antiretrovirals, people who were HIV positive, suddenly that got cut off. And undoubtedly, some of them died during that period. So what we need to be doing is to have independent reviews of the foreign aid programs we have and be transparent, acknowledge that occasionally there are stuff-ups, and in any human activity there are occasionally stuff-ups. Happens with anything that either governments or individuals might do. I think Australia's foreign aid program is deplorably small in proportion to our wealth. We're not quite sure where we are now, but I think it's something like 22 cents in every $100 that the nation earns, so 0.22% of our gross national income. And that's less than a third of what the best nations do, some of the Scandinavian nations, for example. So we're really lagging behind. But some of the programs, I think, are probably quite good. But again, we need to have that evaluation and to sort through them and to know which ones are. And then I think if we do that, and if the public is convinced, gets the message as the really important good things that our foreign aid is doing, they won't just automatically say, "Oh, foreign aid, that's our taxes, they're being wasted, and I'm not going to vote for you if you want to increase foreign aid."
Sometimes you mentioned the letters in your mailbox from the 20 separate charities, and the guilt hits you. I understand that guilt can be a motivator, but guilt, much like fear, yes, it can motivate you, but not for too long. What's a way that we can think about donating to effective charity and giving some of our money to an effective charity that doesn't come from that kind of guilty place?
Well, I agree entirely. I think that guilt is not the best way to motivate people. What we can do is to emphasize the positive, the good sense that you get. We talked a little bit earlier about warm glows, but there's something that's much more lasting and important than a warm glow, and that's the sense that I am living my life to some purpose, and the purpose is not simply me, maybe not even simply me and my reasonably comfortably off dependents, but I'm part of a tradition that is trying to make the world a better place. I'm part of a tradition that is trying to help people wherever they are, particularly those who are at the margins in terms of poverty or in other ways oppressed and in need. And I'm using my good fortune in being a citizen of an affluent country with, as you said, sort of free healthcare and not to mention things like safe drinking water and free schools for our children and all of these things. And I'm not just sitting back with that, but I'm using it to give some assistance to others in great need.
The idea of using guilt as a motivator or a moral position as a justification for perhaps not great behavior. And I'll admit this to you. I think we spoke about it last time, but I don't think I said it so explicitly. I'm a vegan, and I have been for 24, maybe more. I'm 52, so half my life. But I don't identify as vegan generally, and I don't do stuff for vegan charities because I can't stand the way they go about things. Because I don't think it's very effective to shame people or guilt people into changing their behaviour. I don't agree with it, and I think certainly on the left, further left from me, people get a lot of stuff wrong there because you're not trying to take someone, as you just said so wonderfully, you're not trying to take someone on a journey as to here's why it's a good idea. instead of it's like you're terrible because you're doing that. And I understand the emotion behind it, but I can't get around it, Peter.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we ought to be talking to people about the pleasures of a vegan diet, all the fresh foods and different foods, variety of tastes that we get, the fact that it's a healthy diet, and the fact that it's a diet that is both kinder to animals, not complicit in factory farming and abuse of animals, but also, of course, kinder to the planet. It has a much lower carbon footprint. Um, so there's a whole lot of things. You could mention the risks of pandemics, which have in the past have come out of factory farms sometimes. So there are many factors that contribute to that. And I think you can just feel, yeah, this is the kind of lifestyle that I want to live. I'm enjoying it. I like my food. I like knowledge of where my food comes from. And I'm flourishing with this way of living. And, you could try it too. But yes, you don't want to be constantly shaming people for not going that way.
The sobriety fellowship that I'm a part of, they talk about attraction, not promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's been told you've got a problem with alcohol, you need to stop drinking, knows the first answer to that is, well, get fucked. You're the one with the problem. I'm fine. Approaching it from that angle never works. Never works. But I understand why. I understand why, because it's such an emotive thing inside us to talk about. How can you heal a rupture? Like, where do you even begin to heal a rupture when you've got two people who feel that they have been morally wounded by something that's happened? How do you come back together?
I think you have to be pragmatic about these things. You have to look at where we are, and there are things you can change, and there are things you can't change. And it's important to focus on the things that you can change. I think that's the beginning of wisdom here. And so you can move people a little bit around the edges. You can buy a positive approach, as we were saying, by trying to look at the reasons why people hold certain views and see whether there's an opening in that discussion that you can bring them closer to the view that you believe is correct, and of course give them the opportunity to bring you closer to the view that they believe is correct.
And that's where the work is, I think, often, because I might like to think that I don't have the identity defense mechanism that my former colleague had, but somewhere in there it's there, and somewhere in there it's batting away ideas that come up against, because it's uncomfortable to hear that, hang on, this thing that I think is right actually might not be. It's difficult to hear that stuff, and so the work is to be done is often within us, isn't it?
Yeah, I think often it's because you identify yourself with a particular group, and the group has a kind of a package of views, and some of those views you actually may not really agree with if you think about them a little bit, but because the group goes along with this, and because you know that if you say, well, I don't think that's quite right, then they'll all look at you and say, hey, what's happened to you? You've gone over to the dark side. So I think we need to be more open. And one of the things that worries me about the last 20 years or so in terms of conversations is that we are becoming less open. There are things that people hesitate to say, that they self-censor because of what their friends will think, and the people will take offense. And I think we need to have a more robust kind of discourse where we, people understand that you may say things that offend them, and they may say things that offend you, but you can rise above offense, and it's important to get these issues out in the open and be able to talk about them.
It's particularly difficult when some of the learned scripts to some of these conversations contain such dehumanizing language. It is difficult to see the humanity in another person once we've crossed that line over to just the dehumanizing label of, well, all people who are blur are not to be listened to. And that's when we get into real trouble. And we don't need to look far back in history to notice when's that happen? Even with all of your experience, and maybe this might serve as somewhat of a primer, let me ask you, what do you do, Peter, when you're confronted with a problem that you don't know what to do with? How do you break it down? Where do you even start?
Well, I inform myself about the nature of the problem would be the first question. And what are the options when you say, I don't know what to do? What are the things that I might be able to do? And what would be the consequences of those things? Where would they lead? What are the chances that I could actually achieve if I do that? I could actually achieve the goal. So that's
And
that's
where
where I would start.
are you standing in a utilitarian place when you look?
Utilitarianism is a theory that says the right action is the one that has the best consequences. And by best consequences, utilitarians mean the best impact on the well-being of all of those affected. And actually, the utilitarians, whether it's Bentham or John Stuart Mill or Henry Sidgwick, the great 19th century utilitarians, were all very explicit that this includes animals. In that respect, they were far ahead of their time. Yeah, that's what you look at. You look at the consequences for all of the conscious beings who will be affected by your action, as far as you can. And obviously, that's not easy to calculate.
It seems humans have this really interesting thing, and maybe it started somewhere around after the Renaissance, after the scientific kind of Renaissance thinking, that we as humans we're separate from the rest of the planet that we live in, that we can exist and mold and shape and make corn out of this thing and make a cavoodle out of a wolf, and we are in charge, but we are not a part of the system, therefore we can treat it however we like. But it sounds like the
Yeah,
people you discuss.
that. I mean, in the Renaissance, that was basically a religious viewpoint
Yeah,
that we have immortal souls. They don't. We're made in the image of God. They're not. We're part of this great chain of being, halfway between the brutes and the angels. But Darwin came along sometime after that, and I think Darwin showed very clearly that we are part of um, an evolved forms of life, and we are still learning how much we share with many of the non-human animals, whether they're the ones that are close to us and look like us, like chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans, or whether they're ones that live in a very different environment, say like an octopus. An octopus is very far removed from us in evolutionary terms, yet clearly it has intelligence, can solve problems, and I think it's very likely to be a conscious being.
I mean, I've stood at the wall of the Hoover Dam, and this was built by hand. There was machines involved, but there was people. People died making it. But you look at it, and they've just completely changed the landscape. It's gargantuan in scale. How could you not think that I have dominion over this world? Therefore, I can treat it however I want. I can burn as much coal. I can clear as much forest as I like, and then be told, "Oh, so bee populations are collapsing. Uh, we need to do something about it."
Well, maybe because of all the fossil fuels you're burning, the climate is changing, and the Hoover Dam isn't going to fill anymore.
Yeah.
Because it becomes drier out there. So yeah, you can't get away with ignoring all of the ramifications of your actions,
Yeah.
and it will make even these what seem to be enormous human achievements like the Hoover Dam transforming nature. In the end, shows us that we are still part of nature, and we cannot dominate it and bend it to our will entirely.
It's the part that really gets me about the religious fundamentalism when it comes to particularly climate action. It's like, well, hang on, if you believe that a God made it all, why are you destroying it?
Well, I mean, some Christians or religious people would say God gave us free will and led us to do what we're doing, and we're doing bad things. And I hope those Christians are trying to use their free will to reverse what's going on so that we can survive. But
We're grown adults, and people can get set in their ways sometimes. But for people who are listening with children, what are some ways that uh, we may be able to help introduce the idea of ethical thinking and decision making into our kids' everyday lives, so they go through their life starting younger with a bit more scope around how they tackle problems?
yeah, well, obviously, children learn by example, what their parents do. So I think if you are doing things, if you are giving, for example, to help people in need, strangers in need, you tell your children about this. You tell them why you're doing it, and there's a good chance. There's no certainty, of course. Some of them will rebel and go differently, but they may well grow up seeing that as a good thing to do. And if you actually have good values and live in accordance with their values, you are increasing the chances that your children will do that too.
When you're going out to dinner and you walk into the veggie restaurant, do people drop their forks and go, "Oh, he's here"?
No, not you. No, I wouldn't say that. But occasionally somebody comes up to the table and says, are you Peter Singer? I read Animal Liberation and it turned me into a vegetarian. So it does happen. And sometimes the people running the restaurant know, but no, it's not quite as you described.
What happens when we start to focus on what we can do, particularly when it comes to really, difficult ethical, moral things that we're quite troubled by, like the stuff we're seeing in the news?
Yeah, I mean, if we do that well and seriously, and we are working with other people who have similar values and who can be our friends or companions in that, because we are social beings and we don't do very well, most of us, alone. I think we find that a really fulfilling life, a life well lived. And by the way, let me mention I'm co-hosting a podcast called Lives Well Lived, and
There you go.
we talk with lots of people who are living well. And if you're interested in how to follow up that, there's a wide array of examples that we have now in the episodes we've released.
Is there a through line that you've identified already?
Well, we do always ask our guests whether they've lived well. Most of them say they have, not absolutely all of them. And when we then ask them, well, what has been most important in your life? Warm, close relationships with somebody I love and care for is a very important part of that. Having some purposes that I value as important is another part of that. People want some kind of meaning in their lives. In fact, the last two episodes that we've recorded are both about mattering, about do I matter to others. One with Jennifer Wallace, who's a journalist who's been writing about this, and one with Rebecca Goldstein, who's a philosopher. Like 40 years ago, she wrote an interesting novel called The Mind-Body Problem about a graduate philosophy student, and both their intellectual life and their body life, their sexual life. And it's a very good read, and it does talk about mattering. And she has now come back to that 40 years later in writing a more philosophical study of what it is to matter and why that's important and how it can help us to live a fulfilling and meaningful life.
And at the risk of making a really clunky segue, all of these things and more can be yours by effectively donating a small portion of your income to a charity that has been assessed and looked at by the Life You Can Save Foundation.
Thank you. That's very good of you. Yes.
It truly is. I mean, that's what it provides. I mean, it can't provide you the relationship and care. It's never a deathbed thing. It's like, I wish I spent more time scrolling on my phone. It's like, I wish I spent more time with the people I loved.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's also, I mattered to people, and I got out of bed and I knew that I had a sense of purpose. And that came to me when I became a stepfather. Suddenly my life was just all about providing for this young girl. And now we've got two kids. And like, it's incredible. It just gives you this thing. And to matter to somebody, if you mentioned before the people having a conversation who've been trained up to speak to people with depression, they may never know your name, but because that service is there, you matter to them, and that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're in the section of this podcast that gets into clunky segues, let me mention that as well as individuals giving, I've now joined or started to form a movement to encourage more companies to give profits. And actually, we have some great examples in Australia. If you have ever bought tickets for an event through Humanitics, you're purchasing your fees are going to a company that is both a very efficient company selling tickets, and also 100% of the profits go to charity. That's the way it's set up. Some of others will know who gives a crap. The toilet paper company.
I wiped my bum with their product this morning.
And I did too. So they needed some investment monies, but 50% of their profits go to providing sanitation and clean drinking water for people in low-income countries. So Australia has some good examples of these kinds of companies, and we, in the Profit for Good movement, which is profitforgood.com, if you want to go there, are trying to encourage other companies to give at least 10% of their profits anyway. And if they give more, of course, that's better. Because there's a huge amount of, I think, trillions of dollars of company profits in the world, and less than 1% of them are going to good causes. And I think that could easily be boosted. And it could, in a way, help to make capitalism more ethical if more of those profits went for good things.
Oh, there's more than enough food and money that exists on the world today to help everyone not live in poverty.
Yes,
it's just
absolutely.
we don't have to make anything new. It's just making sure the stuff can get there.
Yes.
And convincing people who've got their hands on it to maybe move it around a bit. It's an absolute highlight to be able to speak with you again, Peter. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, Osher. It's been great.